You guys, you lollygag the ball around the infield. You lollygag your way down to first. You lollygag in and out of the dugout. Do you know what that makes you, Larry?
Lollygaggers.
Lollygaggers.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Hollywood Gold. I'm your host, Daniela Taplin-Lundberg, and I'm here with my right-hand woman, Becca Camerata, my head of production. How are you, Bex?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, it's so good to see your face. We're recording now in the same room, which has not been the case for a few months. So this is so great.
I've missed the in-person interactions. It's so much easier to talk about movies when you're looking at the person and you're feeding off of that person. So I'm just very excited to be here with you.
One of our mutual friends, Namdi, texted me saying, Becca's energy is so positive. And I just realized looking at your face, it's so true. It puts me in such a good mood. Oh, I hate when you're not with me in the same room. Anyways, today we have a very special episode. We're going to talk to Ron Shelton, the writer-director of Bull Durham, which is one of my favorite films.
Which is surprising because I never thought of you as a sports film fan.
It's so true. You know, when I brought this up to the team, we're a group of ladies, and everyone sort of looked back at me with a blank expression. You know, I've mentioned this before. I'm about 10 years older than everyone else in the office. So generationally, it's part of it. But I realized that I am a sports film buff. But how did I convince you to watch the film, Bex?
I am definitely not a sports film fan. I mean, I will watch them and I appreciate them, but it's not my thing. But you swore that this was a romance.
Yes.
Set in the world of sports.
Yeah.
And so obviously I love romance. So I watched it and you were right. I was hooked. I was into this love triangle. I was into Susan Sarandon's sexually empowered, baseball loving character.
What a character she was.
Oh my gosh.
Oh. Yeah, I basically told the office it was like Twilight, but
you did.
It's a love triangle.
That is how she sold it.
I got all the gals to watch it then. But Kevin Costner was just coming up. He had recently come out in a movie called The Untouchables, which is another one I'd love to explore at one point because it's so, so good. And then Shelton is going to tell the story of how this got made. But it was through luck and passion that this film got made. It almost didn't get made. And I think it's one of those stories where there were a lot of doubters along the way until the film was actually successful and critics saw it, which is something that we're sort of seeing as a theme, right? It sort of feels like we're exploring a lot of films that were not such obvious hits.
Yeah, I think there are two themes that have been emerging for me are we're exploring a lot of people's first films, iconic filmmakers' first films.
Yes.
And films that people didn't want to take a risk on and didn't believe in.
Yeah.
But then they became huge hits.
That's right. And they're sort of like all in the American canon of cinema at this point. But, I would say more often than not that you're right. A lot of these films almost didn't get made or didn't get seen. So let's kick it off with Ron Shelton, the Philosopher King. I want to go back and really understand where the seed of the idea came from, how it developed, and then how it actually got made. And I really feel like your story was so complex, and some movies happen like that, and some take 15 years to make, and some land somewhere in the middle. But you did it so beautifully in your book, so we'll have to really paraphrase quite a bit. But I really loved all the anecdotes because it just felt like every step of the way you were sort of fighting the suits. And at the end of the day, you ultimately made this incredible legacy film that people still love today. I loved in your intro that you had met a family who had named their children Crash and Nuke. And that was sort of one of the things that prompted the writing of this. So start at the beginning and give me a little background about who you are, because I was so impressed with your whole history as well.
I'm a native of Southern California. My father's from Texas. And I said, when did you leave? He said, the day I was old enough to drive. But at the same time, you never escape your roots. And I had a Baptist upbringing with a love of music, love of jazz. How you can become a jazz fan living in Taft, California is the magic of the country, I think, at its best. So, yeah, and I talk a lot about playing baseball in school and professionally in the minor leagues. none of which I ever thought would lead me to becoming a writer-director, which is kind of what the book is about.
Yeah.
I grew up, and the book talks about this, in high school, college, and especially professionally, baseball days, I really fell in love with movies because I was on the road all the time. And I didn't like watching soap operas like most of my baseball playing buddies. So I did not ever imagine that 15 years after I quit playing baseball, I would be a writer. I thought if I had a career, I'd be making political movies because I was very politically concerned and actively involved, and I'm still the same. But
Yeah.
I did not like sports movies for the most part as a kid or as an adult. And I thought they falsely romanticized the game. And more importantly, they missed the heart of why men compete and ultimately why women compete. And what is the joy of that and the struggle of that and what's really going on in competition, not what the fan thinks is going on.
Right.
Which was always way more interesting to me than what you saw on television. So after Under Fire, thankfully, Roger Spottis, the director, and John Taplin, the producer, let me direct the second unit. And the great John Alcott, Stanley Kubrick's cinematographer, was sort of who I had to get camera lenses from every morning at 5 o'clock in deep southern Mexico.
It had somehow escaped me that you had written Under Fire. I mean, it is one of the great films of my dad's career, one of the ones that he's most proud of. And I could tell the way you talked about it, it was something you were proud of. And I think it's one of his greatest films. So it just tickled me.
Well, I had a great time. We had a great time making that movie. It never found an audience here.
Yeah.
It found an audience in Europe, but I owe a great deal to John because that sort of launched my career.
Right. I noticed throughout that you had developed a lot of relationships over the course of that film. And so it did help you in a way get Bull Durham made, which I have to say, Ron, like I know the film came out of your brain and you directed it, but it really felt like you had a huge hand in producing it as well.
Well, at that point, I realized having been all that time on sets that I thought I'd be good at this. I liked working with people. I was very decisive, but I also was a good listener.
Uh-huh.
And that all came from sports, to be perfectly honest, because you have to work with diverse personalities and egos and deal with all kinds of problems that, again, the fan never sees, but they're in the locker room. So I decided it was time to direct. And the only way I'd get a movie made is if I wrote about a subject that I knew more about than anybody in the movie business. And that was playing professional baseball in the minor leagues.
So smart.
And, I thought nobody's going to want me to direct it. And the book agonizes over how true that was. But nobody could say, well, somebody else knows this subject better than you. It was kind of like Oliver Stone wrote Platoon.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody could have written that script who wasn't fighting for his life in the trenches of Vietnam. So
that's right.
It was so obvious that he's the only guy to direct it.
Well, it's so funny, Ron. I just want to interject because I read Stone's book about the making of Platoon, and I found a lot of similarities in that you truly were the expert in this domain, but people kept trying to tell you what you knew better than they did. And whether it's war or athletics or whatever that was, I really noticed that like your strength of vision was the thing that carried you through. But it's amazing that, you were sort of had a hand in Platoon because I did see a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, that's, I think the book asks this question a lot. Why do people who don't know anything about what you're doing try to tell you what to do just because they worked for a corporation that wrote the check?
Right.
If I was a billionaire and I bought a chain of hospitals, I wouldn't go into the surgery room and tell the brain surgeon which tool to operate on.
Right.
And yet in the movies, everybody thinks they know better.
Right.
And they don't know how to talk to actors. They don't know script structure. They don't know what a camera lens is.
Right.
They have no idea of the battle every day is. So instead of fighting the fight to make the movie, you're fighting the fight that you shouldn't have to fight.
Because that was the first time you had really directed, right? And so I'm sure it was a battle every day in a way. It was your own war.
Well, the big problem was that I think I did know what I was doing, and the cast knew what I was doing and supported me, and the crew and the producers. The only people that didn't like it was the studio.
Right.
And the studio thought it wasn't funny. Bull Durham wasn't funny. They thought it wasn't sexy. They thought it wasn't romantic. They kept telling me nobody will believe Susan Sarandon would go to bed with Tim Robbins, to which I say I'm the godfather of their firstborn child. true. I had drinks with him and Susan and dinner last week in New York.
Stop.
And here's the shocker. They said Susan didn't look good. Hello?
Right.
She was 40 at the time and just blew the doors off the truck, you know? And
right.
it's like, why are you even having these conversations? That is what I think Oliver was talking about too in his book.
Right.
So how do you tell somebody it's funny when they say it isn't?
Right.
That's, you know.
So you go into Tom Mount. He seems to have an invested interest in minor league baseball, and he kind of likes the idea. That's where I want to sort of begin, right?
Well, yeah, but the pitch was 5 words: Lysistrata in the minor leagues. And he knew Lysistrata, the Aristophanes play, famous play about women withholding their sexual favors for their men unless the men stopped going to war. So he knew the minor leagues and he knew Aristophanes. So I thought, well, that's very hard to find in this town.
Right.
And then he said, you know anything else? And I didn't really, except there was a pitcher, a catcher, and a woman, and that she'd be telling the story. And that honestly was all I had. And he said, I think it's great. Go write it. So I honestly was living in an apartment at the time, and I just kind of started writing. I went to the Carolinas and drove around to see if minor leagues had changed since I played, and they hadn't. Major leagues had changed mightily.
Right.
But
meaning the minor league players were treated the same as when you had played, which is sort of as slightly second-class citizens.
Yeah, well, their pay is barely subsistence level.
Yeah.
The bus rides are long.
Right.
I played in the Texas League or the South. It's brutally hot. You have very few days off.
Right.
And you're thrilled to be there.
Right.
That's the important thing. And you're fighting for your life and your career. And I kept moving up from Appalachian League to the California League to the Texas League.
Yeah.
Which goes from El Paso and Albuquerque at that time in the west to Memphis, Tennessee in the east. So there's some serious bus rides.
Oh, my God. So and that's how the minor leagues work. It's all sort of regional, except there's like a region that seems very big.
That was a very big region.
My God, those bus rides just must have been.
Well, by the time you get to AAA, you get a few little plane rides. So
okay.
But, look, it's also the greatest time of your life.
I love this story of developing the characters and how Crash sort of felt like he was sort of your avatar in some way, right? It felt like he was your voice, but then it sort of felt like Annie was becoming your voice a bit too. And talk about how you developed those 3 sort of key characters a bit.
Well, I think there's a little bit of me in all of them, including Nuke.
Yeah.
Crash, I didn't see myself in when I wrote it, but over the course of time, I see myself in. Mm-hmm. Crash is a cowboy. I saw the whole movie as a Western.
Right.
I loved Westerns. Westerns inspired me to make movies. Mm-hmm. Sam Peckinpah, I reference a lot.
Yeah.
But other, Howard Hawks, lots of John Ford. Mm-hmm. And Crash is a man who's the consummate professional. He's a gunslinger, really, who goes from town to town plying his trade. And when he's done the job, he's sent away and he finds another town. And he has no roots. You know nothing about where he came from, just like the classic American gunslinger.
Right.
Did he sign out of high school, out of college? Where is he from? What part of the country? What did his parents do? How did he seems to have read more books than most people, most ball players. Where did that go? You never learn anything about it.
Right.
And that's exactly how it should be. That creates a mystery. But boy, he can go toe to toe with Annie. Annie came from, lots of women I knew very few who actually liked baseball. I kind of took women I knew from the 60s, and now it was 15 years later, and they were 40. And it's really a movie about 2 people, Crash and Annie, who are at a reckoning point of their life.
Yes.
Can they keep doing what they've been doing?
Right.
Is she going to spend the rest of her life with 19-year-old boys who leave in September when the season's over? And can he also keep playing with boys, if you think about that?
Yeah.
So they come into each other's life unexpectedly, and it forces all these existential questions, and they can't get out of their own way for an hour and 48 minutes.
Ron, can I ask you, do you feel like you were in a point in your life where you related to that? I mean, this was a big pivot for you to go from minor league baseball player to writer to director. Did it echo that in any way, or was that sort of just coincidental?
Probably unconsciously. I mean, I was in my own reckoning. I had a long marriage that was ending, and I had 2 daughters that I adored, and that was trying to reckon that was complicated and painful. I think we all have reckoning and reckonings throughout our life.
Right.
I think they're cheaply called midlife crises. I don't. I think that sort of cheapens it.
Yeah. I
You know,
agree.
Crash loves something more than it loves him back, and
Oh,
I
I love that line.
think that's maybe why the movie has lasted, because it's way bigger than baseball, and it's not a male issue; it's a female. It's a whatever gender preference you have. It's a life issue.
Yeah.
We've all loved something, someone, a job, a pet, whatever,
Yeah.
more than we're getting back from it. So he has to come to that reckoning.
Yeah.
And for both of them, Crash and Annie, to give up the way they've been living, which has worked pretty well until now, they know that they're going to have to take a chance on something they've never done, which is a real relationship.
Yes.
You know, she has short-term ones that she justifies with this fabulous ontological poetry and philosophy.
Yes.
And he's probably, we imagine, has been the king of one-night stands, but he's done with all that.
Right.
And she's done with all that. But a real relationship means you don't leave in September. Then it gets hard. Relationships are hard. They're complicated.
Yeah.
They're challenging. Life relationships are a tremendous amount of work. And I don't mean it like it's drudgery, but it takes all of a person.
Yeah.
And that's one thing they've never had to do. But they're a little afraid of it. And they're also deeply drawn to it.
I hook up with one guy a season. Usually takes me a couple weeks to pick the guy. Kind of my own spring training. And well, you two are the most promising prospects of the season so far.
Who are you? Who's he? I'm the player to be named later.
Okay, so you finished the script. Where are we?
The studio that Tom had a deal was Columbia.
Okay.
And they hated the script.
Okay. Okay.
They wouldn't even meet with me. I tried to get a meeting because by this time I had a temporary office at Tom's on the Columbia lot. Now, that was when Warner Brothers and Columbia shared a lot. So half of it was Warner Brothers and half was Columbia. So I could have walked 10 minutes to the head of Columbia's office, and I kept saying, give me 15 minutes in your office. Give me 10 to tell you why I think this movie works and why I can deliver it.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, Kevin Costner is attached to it. It's
so you've already attached him. I want to go through that lunch. Talk me through giving it to Costner's agent and how that process was, because that's such a great story.
In those days, if you gave a script to an agent, they actually read it. And a studio head actually read things. It was quite shocking.
Yeah.
Well, I knew this agent, J.J. Harris, the late J.J. Harris.
Yes.
Because she had worked for the director's agent on Under Fire. Mm-hmm. And now she was an agent. And she knew that I'd done a lot of second unit filming on the movie, and we'd all made a good movie. So she took my call and said, let me read it. She read it and said, I like this, and I will give it to Kevin. And I thought I'd never hear from any of them again. And then I hear back, and Kevin says, let's have lunch.
I do briefly want you to tell me the story of how you went to lunch with Costner, because it's so good.
Well, before he committed, but he read the script, wanted to have lunch. We met at this little tiny place, not there anymore, on Melrose, called the Studio Grill. And we're talking about the thing, the movie and the script. And he says, look, he says, you play professionally. He said, I only played in high school. I want to try out for you. And I said, you don't have to try out. I hear you're a good athlete. He said, no, I want to make sure I can do what you need me to do. I said, well, let's go over to the batting cages on Sepulveda Boulevard in the Valley, right off of Ventura Boulevard. There's miniature golf courses, there's video arcades, and there's batting cages that you put a quarter in.
Amazing.
So I remember he ordered some shots of vodka. And I'm not a vodka drinker, and I don't drink anything till late in the day, but I said, let's go. So we went over there, and for some reason, we both had a ball and a mitt in our trunk. I don't know why
Amazing.
I don't remember using it before, but we played catch in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And as I say in the book, one throw and one catch, and you know if a guy can play. It just, you could take the greatest soccer player ever.
Yeah.
And he would look awkward trying to do that.
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay. It's brilliant.
And people are walking by him. They don't know who he is yet. Then we go in the cage. I start throwing quarters in. He's just gorgeous looking hitter. He's got a beautiful swing right-handed. And then he says, hey, I can do this left-handed. And I said, you're kidding. And he's got he's like a switch hitter. And he starts hitting left-handed. And he's clearly an athlete, not an actor pretending to be an athlete.
Right.
That's the big difference. And the switch hitting, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I can shoot him backlit wherever the sun is.
Oh my God.
Or I can make him look heroic all the time.
You just like saved a couple $100,000. Hey, so tell me where Kevin was in his sort of career trajectory. Because it feels like he was about to become a huge star.
He was, but there was a lot of people who are about to become a huge star. The list is very long. He had been cut out of The Big Chill. He was the guy who died. They
famously
showed up for the wake. And so he was cut not because of his performance, because they just discovered the movie worked better if you never knew the guy who died.
Yeah.
So I think he committed to it around the time that The Untouchables came out.
Okay.
And that was a big hit. But, it was considered that it was Sean Connery and De Niro. They were driving.
Right.
And then he had another movie in the can at Orion. And we were trying to beat Orion's doors down, but they'd already were making 2 baseball movies and nobody wanted to make any, much less a third.
Right, right.
Kevin was going around town with me to meet with studio heads.
Which is like amazing. That doesn't happen. I mean,
and he would say, Ron's my guy. He's going to do it. And everybody would say, oh, there's no foreign sales and it's the minor leagues. And Kevin really had my back. Mm-hmm. I had 30 days to get the movie great, or Kevin had to go do another movie.
Okay.
And we were down to the 29th day. And on the 29th day, he came back to my little temporary office, and we do what we do at the end of the day, pour a modest libation. And he said, what about Orion? He says, I have a picture opening, an Orion movie opening in the morning.
Oh.
Called No Way Out.
Oh, my God.
And he says, I don't think they like it much because they're putting it out in August. That's
right, dead zone.
It isn't anymore, but
back
in those
in
days,
the day. Yeah.
that was the dumping ground, was August. And so we called Bill Bernstein, the late, great Bill Bernstein, and Eric Pleskow, who were partners in the company, and said, we got 1 day left. Read this. Now, today, they say, okay, we'll read it tonight. And Kevin said, you've got to read it tonight. I'm not lying. In these days, you just email the script, but there was no email. There's no cell phones then.
Got to print that out.
So he called William Morris in New York. It was like 7 o'clock New York time. And he said, get 2 scripts to Orion immediately. So the next day, I come in that little office and I started cleaning out my desk. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
And I get a call from New York, Orion. And they say, do we really have to make a deal today? Because it's 4 o'clock in New York. I said, yes. Anyway, we made a deal. By Monday, we were greenlit. And 5 weeks later, we shot the movie.
No, not 5 weeks later. Stop.
5 weeks, yeah. What happened Friday morning was, which I didn't know about, No Way Out, which they didn't know what to do with.
Right.
That's what dumped it in August.
Right.
Open to rave reviews. And the New York Times, Vincent Canby said, Kevin Costner's a movie star. And they say, well, wait a minute, we got the movie star. 24 hours, we got this guy. That's how it got made. And had No Way Out not got a good review.
Right.
We would have never made it.
You've been dead in the water. Oh, my God. So literally, why did you had 5 weeks because of Costner's schedule? Like, why did you have to shoot 5 weeks later?
Winter was coming in. A lot of things were conspiring against us. We shot it after the days were short. We had no prep time.
Oh, my God.
I actually had driven around the area before I wrote the script. And I knew that you could find Annie's house and the ballpark within blocks of each other, and the tobacco warehouses we could use to build the one set we built and use them for wardrobe and art department and offices.
Right.
And because I'd been in production on 2 movies, I understood production. So I knew that, 75 pages of the script can be shot within 3 blocks.
Yes. Yeah.
Which means you're not loading and unloading trucks.
Oh, brilliant.
And it was like 3 weeks to go, and we're driving in a car with a kid from Duke University. We didn't have an actual location manager.
No, stop.
I'm looking for Annie's house, close to the ballpark. And it had a for rent sign.
Perfect.
I said, rent it for 3 months. Let's go rent it. And last week I was in Durham with a book tour.
Yeah.
And I went to the old ballpark, which is fixed up. It's a new ballpark now. And then I went to Annie's house, which is now like a historic monument. It's painted up.
No, stop.
I could have bought the house for $60,000. It just recently sold for $1.7 million.
No, stop.
In Durham. Now, you can rent it like an Airbnb. And everybody wants to know if the bathtub's still there and the whole thing. So,
Oh, if you'd only known.
it's pretty great. It's pretty good.
Okay, so talk to me about hiring Bonnie Timmerman, who I love so dearly. Talk about the casting process because it's so fun.
Bonnie was, of course, one of the top casting directors based in New York, and she'd worked many times for Tom Mount. So Tom said, I want Bonnie. I said, great.
Okay.
I knew we needed to cast out of New York a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's how Bonnie got involved, and she was great.
You know, Tim Robbins just, I think, launched so significantly after your film, but he was not well known, and it felt like that was a big risk for you.
Well, it was the hardest part to cast because I couldn't find somebody who really was different than Kevin. I found 20-year-old versions of Kevin, but that wouldn't make sense. I needed somebody very different physically, and he comes in the room, he's like 6'5", and it's got a lot of presence and physicality.
Yeah.
And he actually had played baseball, but he'd not pitched. And I thought they were perfect together because Nuke had something that would frustrate Crash. And yet Crash has to be the teacher. So he's pissed off and he's still so much a professional that he has to still do his job.
Right,
and,
right.
What Tim didn't tell me, nor did his agents, is that he actually did have a credit. It was called Howard the Duck, which was one of the biggest flops in history. And they didn't tell me. I didn't know that till 6 months later. So I had Nuke and then casting Annie, which is a lot in the book about.
Well, tell us how clever Susan Sarandon was in securing the part. That's one of the great stories. And I was just like, wow.
Frustrating thing, and this every director knows this story, that the financing entity, whether it's a studio in those days or it could be a streaming company now or a network, they have this thing called the list. And they each have a list and it's a little different, a little the same, a little different. And it's the names of actors and actresses who are bankable at that moment.
Right.
And that they will work with. If you get this person, we'll make the movie.
Right.
The problem is the list keeps changing. So you're bringing in actresses, because every actress that auditioned was great. Every actress was a different version of Annie. They all felt they knew that character. So the list kept changing. And for some reason, Sarandon wasn't on it. Now, I thought that was coming from Medavoy. It wasn't. It was coming from this unnamed executive who kept throwing wrench in the works of everything we tried to do.
Ron, you know the name. You're choosing not to name this unnamed executive.
Yeah, it's
you can
a person.
tell me later. You can tell me later.
It's not a collective idea. It's one person.
Okay.
At any rate, we had trouble with that person forever. Bureaucrat with power. But Susan wasn't on the list, and her agent kept calling, and I kept lying. I said, well, I don't think she's quite right. Agent knew I was telling a lie. So I think the agent sussed out that she must not be approved for some reason.
Right.
So the agent calls to say, Susan, she was living in Italy with her 2-year-old daughter, and she was with an Italian director at that time who was the father of Eva.
Okay.
So she's flying from Italy. It wasn't even to New York, where we were also casting. She's going to fly to L.A. from Italy with her 2-year-old.
Oh, my gosh.
And audition. And so you have to see her. And, of course, I have to see her out of respect. So I said to Kevin, Susan's flying all the way from Italy, man. You got to be here. We got to,
Yeah.
But she wasn't on the list. But don't tell her, which she already knew.
Right.
And so she came in. She was great. She had this red and white horizontally striped tube dress.
Yep.
It was carefully chosen.
Yes.
And
very Annie-esque.
Yeah. And just total control, pushed everybody around in the most loving, fun way.
Right.
She knew her lines. It was like a dazzling audition.
Oh.
And so she left the room. And it was a Friday. 2 weeks before shooting, we didn't have Annie. 2 weeks.
Oh.
There were other people who were good, but there was nobody, the producer, the casting director, Kevin, me, and the studio. You like to be in sync.
Yeah, it's a big part.
So we're sitting there doing what I would do, a modest libation. And Kevin and a couple producers and me, what do we do? It's Friday afternoon. We're supposed to shoot in 2 weeks. And there were still other actresses in the running. And I get a call from Mike Medavoy, the head of Orion, and he says, hey, I saw Susan a couple weeks ago. She looks great. Put her on the list. Well, I knew he didn't see her a couple weeks ago because she was in Italy a couple weeks ago. And what turned out is that Susan went from our office straight to the Orion office and schmoozed her way up and down the hallways.
Oh, my God.
just all the male executives said, "Oh my God, why isn't she on the list?" And anyway, she got put on the list like an hour and a half after she left our office.
I mean, what gumption and what a smart move. Like, it was so Annie to do.
It was so Annie. It was so Annie. And we had a deal with her by the next day, and I was on a flight on Sunday to Durham.
Oh my God. I love that. It makes me love Susan Sarandon even more than I already do, but keep going.
Well, I told this story when I gave her an award at something. She wanted me to present it. And I said, look, in this age of, polarized and gender politics and everything, you got to be careful how you do this. And I said, look, this is when I was a big crowd. And I said, Susan has approved of this introduction I wrote. I said, but, I don't know a more confident, empowered, open-minded woman in the business. But she also knows the power of a red and white striped tube dress. Because I thought I might get shot down by certain elements.
How dare you call her beautiful and sexy?
Yeah, but exactly. And she just straight up there and said, I believe in the red and white. So, it was it's a great Susan story, and she's right. It's Annie. I mean, there was an actress who wouldn't read. I won't go into the whole story on the air. It's in the book. And she kept saying, I won't read. I don't read. I said, well, Annie would read to everybody. I said, Annie would go out in the street right now in New York City where we were doing it and start reading to people.
Yeah.
Annie reads.
Right. Wait, one other casting story. I mean, there's so many good anecdotes, but the other one you must tell is the Anthony Michael Hall, because that tickled me. Because you just immediately became a director with limits. And I just loved that, even before the first shot.
I tell the story in the book, and I will tell it now. And it's not intended to be a put down to Anthony Michael Hall. I wish he would have written me a letter when it happened saying, I apologize.
Right.
And then it would be forgotten because I have to apologize. So, but studio was very excited about him as a possible nuke. This is before Tim. Since The Breakfast Club and the John Hughes movies, he now was 6'1", and he was supposed to be very athletic. And I thought, wow, that's different. He's very different than Kevin. And that's an interesting idea. Plus, he had a movie in the can at Orion that was testing through the roof called Johnny Be Good.
Yeah.
It didn't do any business, but they thought they had a big hit.
Right.
And I thought, great idea. So the producer and I flew to New York to meet him. And at 6:00 at the Columbus Bar, Grill, whatever it was, on Broadway above Columbus Circle, it was an actor hangout.
Okay.
I met a lot of actors just because they all lived on the west side at that time.
Yeah, okay.
Before it got so expensive, they had to move to New Jersey. And and I remember sticking my head in because we had a table outside on the sidewalk. And John Gotti, the mobster, was holding court in the corner. Because Gotti was like the movie star gangster,
Totally.
Yeah. And so he was over there, and that amused me. And we went outside. So he shows up with a posse of 6 guys.
Anthony Michael Hall.
And we sit down. Now, keep in mind, I'm flown from LA for this meeting.
Right. You've gone across the country.
And Mark Berg as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Producer. And small talk, fine. And I was a little annoyed he brought 6 people with him.
That is annoying.
But I said, okay, tell me about the script. What do you think of it?
Yeah.
Art. He says, well, I haven't actually read it yet. Now, he's had it for a week.
Oh, God.
You haven't read it? You got it a week ago. He says, well, I've been kind of busy. And I was completely pissed off. And I stood up and I said, I'll see you at 6:00 here tomorrow without your posse, and we'll discuss the script. And I walked back to the hotel. No cell phones, keep in mind. Mark Berg stayed to kind of tell him, look, man, that's really bad form. The studio flew us here, put us up for a few nights. So I go back and I call his agent. I said, I've never been showed up like that. That I won't tell you what I called him, but
love it.
All is forgiven if he shows up tomorrow and is great.
Right.
6:00. We come back the next day. Mark and he shows up with half his posse. He put some posse, not the big posse, but the little posse.
Okay.
And we sit down and I say, let's just cut to it. What do you think of the script? He says, well, I'm up to page 30.
Oh,
and
God.
I stood up, but I said, it's over. I went back to the hotel. Mark stayed there loyal producer and said, "You can't do that, man. You can't.
Oh,
you can't
my
behave like
God.
that." And I went back and I called the studio, who was hoping that he'd be perfect because they would have
Right.
hired him a lot
Right.
because they've got. And I called the agent and I said, "I never want to see that guy again." Now, he's gone on to have a good career, made 100 movies and TV shows. All he had to do was send me a note or call me to say, "I really screwed up."
Yeah.
That's all he's had to do
Right.
at the time. And I probably wouldn't have told the story, but I'm still kind of like amazed.
Ron, I just want to make an observation, which is that was a very Crash Nuke moment. And Nuke had the opportunity to like make good, right? Like in like the Crash law of, the land, and he didn't. And so he wasn't your Nuke. I mean, it obviously was like the right choice. That's just like art imitating life, life imitating art. That's so incredible.
Come on, Rook. Show us that $1 million arm, because I got a good idea about that 5-cent head of yours.
Okay, so then I know you cast some other sort of athletes to fill out the cast if you could. You wanted like real players if you could, right?
The manager for the real Durham Bulls was a guy named Grady Little. Now, Grady Little later went on to be manager of the Boston Red Sox and the Los Angeles Dodgers. So
Oh, wow.
he was kind of Crash Davis reinventing his life as a manager.
Cool.
And he like Crash had a cup of coffee in the big league. So Grady was a really, really great guy. And we said, "Grady, we need you for a couple more months to organize the baseball, find guys that can actually play. There's minor leaguers in the area that are looking for anything. There's ex-college guys, club players. It can't be an actual college player because if you give them money, they become a professional."
Right. Oh, right.
So you had to get guys that had just finished college or dropped out. So Grady ran a baseball camp and he found the players. And I also would run our actors had to go to the baseball camp every day and do fundamentals and everything. And it was great because Kevin and Tim and our other actors, Danny Gans, who later was a major comic in Vegas, and
Right.
all those guys, they looked forward to it because they were professional manager, trainer.
Yeah.
They got to put on all the gear and go out. And so they would go straight from rehearsal to the workout, like little kids going out to the playground.
Oh, it's awesome.
In kindergarten.
That is so, so great. So you were big on rehearsal. Like that doesn't always happen anymore.
I think it's a real loss. I love
Yeah.
to rehearse. And it's hard to get the agents to commit their actors to it, or they want extra money. It's like starting a baseball season without spring training.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tommy Lee Jones, who I work with and have a great relations with, he calls it practice. And he was the first guy to ever call me coach. So now they call me coach. And to me, that's an honorable term. I mean, a coach is a sacred job to me.
Yeah.
And that's why when there's a bad coach, I think they should go to jail. And a good coach, they're surrogate fathers, really. And
Yeah.
Tommy would say, "Hey, coach, let's get some practice." And he meant rehearsal.
I love it.
And he's a theater major from Harvard.
Right.
So,
Right.
and ever since then, I've thought of it as practice.
Yeah.
So why are we going to start the season without any practice,
Right.
So, we got 2 weeks of rehearsal with the cast, and it was critical.
So we got your cast. You're starting to shoot. Talk about the first few days of shooting, and it felt like you were sort of embattled by the studio sort of very quickly.
Well,
and just talk about how you managed to get through that.
I had a great line producer named David Lester, and the line producer, of course, there's so many good ones out there. David was perfect for me because he's also a filmmaker. And so, the line producer is responsible to keep the thing going on schedule and on budget. But a lot of them don't really care about anything but schedule and budget. David cares about the movie.
Totally.
Are you getting what you need? We don't have any money to do what we need over there. Let me see if I can find a way to do it.
Yes.
And with David, you could actually give him a Nagra and go record something. I've given him a camera and say, go down the street and shoot an armadillo crossing the road.
Oh, wow.
I'll send 5 pages. So David is like that. And we were hard to stay on schedule. It was a mixture of experienced and inexperienced crews.
Yeah.
Weather, all the usual things. It was very slow shooting baseball at night in a ballpark, which you could hardly get a light reading. The lights were so bad from the light meter.
Right.
And then we start getting this bad feedback from the studio. And we were just think, wow, we're doing it. We're pulling it off, And And they're telling us, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. And it was just disheartening in the extreme. And I got in a physical fight with one of the producers, Mark Berg, who I'm still friends with. I mean, I really inappropriately went after him. The book goes into it in some detail.
I'm impressed that you told that story. I really appreciated that. There are just moments, this business can be so filled with frustrating moments. And I can't tell you how many stories of losing.
Well, I was glad he didn't report me because I thought maybe my career had ended after 3 days.
Yeah.
And now we're still talking about a project. So, and later I credit him for two of the most brilliant producing coups ever, where he gets the Pink Floyd concert to fill the stands and figures out a way to get money to repaint the ballpark at the end.
I know. That was so brilliant.
That's Mark. So, I embrace him.
Yeah.
But at that moment, I didn't. And we got over it, but the studio issue was much harder because they're writing the checks.
Right.
And they didn't like Tim, and they didn't like Susan, they didn't like me, they didn't like anything. And
they didn't like Kevin at one point, right? Weren't they? Didn't they even have issues?
Oh, they thought everybody was low energy, and I thought, here's a story. I was just with Robert Wool the other day, and he said, "You gave us the greatest direction when we started." He says, after a game, everybody comes in the locker room. And we were just doing a walkthrough, and everybody come in like, "Yeah, way to go, we won." And he went, "Stop!" He told me the story. I remember now, but I said, "Stop! This is not high school. These are professionals.
Right?
They do this 142 games a year, not counting 8 weeks of spring training, and possibly 2 to 4 weeks of playoffs. And if you're good, you do it every year. If you're in a professional locker room, when people come in, you don't know if they won or lost. When I come off the set after a good day, if I have a good day of shooting where I think we really got it, and I walk off the set, I don't look any different from the days I thought I fucked that up. I don't think I got that.
Right.
Why? Because I'm still playing the game. I got to figure out, now what do I do?
So that really set the tone.
Oh, the air went out of the room, and now it felt like matter of fact. It's a workplace.
Right.
It's a workplace.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a workplace thing.
Right.
High school, they're all fired up. They're young and wild. This is professional. These are veterans.
Yeah. It was lifting the curtain. I love that so much.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so brilliant. So you're shooting. There's one moment where the studio really drops the hammer and replaces your DP, right? After a week?
Second week, and it was grotesquely unfair. And I felt awful about it. I had no choice. I couldn't quit. They did it against my will.
Yeah.
I think it was a horrible mistake. And at that point, the cast, you try to keep problems away from the cast. You want them to just think everything's great and everybody loves you and showing up in character and prepared. But when the DP is fired in the middle of a shot at noon on a Friday, they realized, oops, something's wrong.
Right.
And my job is just to keep it on track, to say, don't worry, just show up. What's the next scene we're going to shoot? We got to be in character. We got to, and that was my job.
When I tell people these stories of these significant dramas and things that go down on sets and that people keep going, I mean, I know for myself, when those things happen, you can't even imagine moving forward. I mean, you're so upset or you're so angry or you're so devastated, and all you can do is show up the next day and keep going. But in the moment, didn't you just feel like, oh, all I need is some support here, and I'm getting just...
I had it from the cast, and I had it from the crew.
You knew.
Yeah, I had that.
Yeah.
I had that. And even when I heard that the studio wasn't happy with me, I do believe the studio didn't dare fire me, because Kevin and Susan and Tim and everybody would have said, well,
right.
Because I'm always close to my cast. I get along with actors great.
Yeah.
I listen to them. I also am firm. I'm clear.
Yeah.
I'm prepared. And we run a good show. If you run a good production, actors relax. When there's production problems, actors get antsy.
Right.
So that's another reason I'm a big believer in the physical production.
Right.
Let's control all the things we can control. No unforced errors here by the rest of it, But I couldn't believe that I was fighting these fights, and I was angry every day. As my assistant, who was my college English professor, I talk about in the book, and he kept a journal which I didn't know about until I started writing the book.
how great.
And I could check dates. I could keep things in order because the memory fails a little bit, but I could, that happened in that order.
Yeah.
And he talks about Black Monday, when people were getting fired, and how I got angrier and angrier, how angry I was going to work every day.
Oh, man.
But with the cast, I'm just trying to get the behavior on screen and the look of the movie on screen, even if the studio didn't like it.
And Ron, so you're keeping up a good face. You're obviously angry. Are you going home at night and just feeling quite alone? I'm just always curious for a director. Is it just suppressing those feelings of doubt? I mean, it must be so hard to have like the higher ups just sort of questioning you when you're right in it.
When you know it's working, that's the problem. I mean, we've all had movies that I know this isn't quite working. I think I can fix it, or there's been a casting mistake that's unfixable. How do I work around that? But this, I was getting exactly the footage I wanted. That was what was maddening.
Right.
That was what was I didn't sleep very well the whole show. I was upset and just trying to survive it a day at a time. But the life lesson is just keep showing up,
I mean, you're getting these incredible performances. I mean, truly memorable legacy performances. And so you must know that. It's so funny to me to hear, you didn't have playback. Like you didn't have like Video Village.
No.
So
I think I might like to shoot a movie without that.
Yeah.
Because in the digital age, the DP needs it, I realize. But I mean, I wouldn't mind trying a movie with no Video Village and no video playback.
Yeah.
The problem is video playback, you can fix an error. In other words, did we see that in the shot?
Right.
But I didn't have it for that movie. I didn't have it for Blaze either. And Haskell Wexler won the American Cinematography Guild Award and the Oscar nominations.
Yeah.
And Video Village is a ridiculous cluster. I won't even go near it now. I have my own thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that more and more.
But the problem with just having the monitor for the DP is they won't let you use that for playback to check something unless you do what everybody does. Say, there was a camera glitch. They know that's a lie. You just want to check something.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the good thing about Video Village is it puts a whole bunch of people you don't want to talk to over there.
Yes. No, it keeps them separate.
Okay, that's them. Yeah.
Totally. I often get relegated to that spot. And so, Ron, the other thing I loved is like the old school playing dailies. That doesn't. Everyone gets their own link, and you're just watching it in an isolated room. But like the idea that you would bring your whole cast and crew to watch dailies on a daily basis. What camaraderie you must have created doing.
I miss that. I think it's a huge loss. And now that I get them on links, I don't even watch dailies. I don't want to watch it.
Yeah.
But we would have a room in the hotel we'd build a little, we'd have a 35 millimeter projector and build a little sound booth for it.
So cool.
And everybody's invited, and we'd have beer and light food and sit on the floor and sit in chairs, and everybody could own their own work.
Yeah.
It made, as I always say, the wardrobe department comes and suddenly it's their movie we're watching. And the prop department, we're watching their movie. And And the person with 3 lines, his first lines of his or her career, is watching their debut. And I think it's a huge builder of team.
Would you screen full dailies, like all the close-ups? How did that work? Was it just like whatever came in, you would watch the whole thing? I mean, that could be.
We'd watch the whole thing, but I don't shoot many takes.
One and done, if it works.
One and done often. When you work with Hackman and Kurt Russell and Tommy Lee Jones, I'll tell them, first of all, if I'm happy, I'm going to tell you. If you want another one, you got it. If you want another and another, you got it.
Okay.
But I'm going to tell you when I'm good.
Listen, sweetheart, you shouldn't listen to what a woman says when she's in the throes of passion.
Yeah, he said crash.
Honey, would you rather I be making love to him using your name or making love to you using his name? Huh?
You talk a lot about in the book, most of the film was really working there, the Kill Your Darlings thing, where you were in the edit and the movie was working, but the scores maybe weren't reflective of how well the movie was working. And so you kind of had to figure out what was the thing
The scores were never good. There's a whole chapter called The Numbers Never Lie. And I called up NRG, which is the National Research Group,
Yeah.
when I was writing this book. And I thought, maybe my memory failed me. We must have had one great screening. And we didn't. And he looked up on the computer. And the guy who looked it up was working on the movie.
No, stop.
30 years ago. And the numbers were bad. We never got out of the 50s. And
Ron, can I just say one thing? I just interviewed Albert Berger and Ron Yerxa. I don't know if you know them about the movie Election. And I will just say, same thing. Like the great movies that sort of push boundaries and maybe aren't so obvious. I think like sometimes that just happens. It has nothing to do with how good the film is sometimes.
But it has a lot to do with the studio's belief in it and how much they put into marketing. That's the problem. We never did test well. We never could figure out why we didn't test well.
Yeah.
But I did cut out everybody's favorite scene, including my own, because the editor, the great Bob Layton, and I, coming back from a screening in Anaheim, dared to ask, is it possible that our favorite scene and everybody's favorite scene is slowing us down?
Yeah.
And we both felt that some air went out of the room, that we had the audience, and then suddenly we didn't, and then we had them back.
Right.
And it's a scene when it's basically Susan's monologue, why she came to baseball, and it's talking to Crash in a bar in the daytime, kind of an unpleasant place they met, but now it's not so romantic and sexy and fun. It's now kind of just sad.
Yes, right.
And I like bars. I don't like them at noon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a very intimate scene about how she came to baseball, and about the loss of a parent and finding a father and burying him and discovering Thurman Munson and all kinds of things. And I came to the conclusion, which I talk about in length in the book, what did I learn, is that there was such intimacy between them in the scene. She was sharing things that you wouldn't share on your first date.
Yeah. Yes.
This is after other intimate lines have been crossed. You feel comfortable to tell some things about.
Right.
And that was the only conclusion I came to, that the movie was kind of over.
Yeah.
Because they might as well have had the sleep together scene by now. They might have, it was like we were done, and it was 30 minutes of the movie to play out, including important stuff. And there's even a huge story point at the end of the scene where Jimmy and Millie come in and say, we got engaged, and they've been together for 4 hours, and this is the wedding, and Annie, will you be the bridesmaid? And which was a great, like, sneaky, dark line, always the bridesmaid. And so I thought, we can't have a wedding without any knowledge of where this came from. Well, guess what? You can't have a wedding. Just have a wedding.
It was seamless.
And it worked perfectly, and probably better. And, poor Susan still doesn't understand where it's got out, because she would have got the Oscar.
In my memory, the button on the scene is, she says, I want you, and he says, stop it.
She says, this is the damnedest season I've ever seen. The Durham Bulls can't win, and I can't get late. He shoves it over. And that led to the scene that is cut.
Right.
They went, they were going after each other. William Blake.
Yeah.
And it's so clear that they're desperate for each other, and they can't figure out how to get out of their own way.
Right.
Because in my life observation, and I'm Exhibit A, we get in our own way more than other people get in our way.
Yeah.
We know what has to be done, and we can't do it, or we agonize getting there.
Totally.
And that sort of drives the movie. Why don't you people just tell Nuke to get lost?
Oh, my God. I mean, Ron, it's like, for me, as a lover of like couples who can't get out of their own way, it felt very reminiscent of Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. They just couldn't, they can't get over their own pride.
In fact, that scene where Crash is in the boarding house ironing in his shorts with scotch on the rocks, where that could have been me in the minor leagues. And except I didn't have an iron. And and that led to the scene we cut up. We took it out, and the movie goes right along fine.
You literally lifted it and didn't have to do anything?
We kept shortening it.
Okay.
So less air went out of the room.
Okay.
And finally, we just looked at each other and said, take it all out. Well, the studio objected to that, and the producers, everybody said, you can't take that scene out. We love it. And we said, well, let's just try it once. And look at it. It wasn't like I didn't love it. It took 2 all-nighters to shoot. And we took it out, and there was just, not only did you not miss it, the movie just sailed.
To me, when you can come up with a solution that's that easy and seamless, I mean, what magic. That must have been a nice moment for you. I mean, painful, but also thrilling that you'd come up with the solution.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is in post-production where we've still not been told anything nice from the studio about you know, it's been like 8 months of just getting the crap beat out of you. And, you know, and a couple of test scores were bad. And then we polished it, and it was still bad. And it was like, it never really started turning around until it was released. And the reviews came out just unbelievable.
Glowing.
And we opened great. We just chugged along all summer. I mean, it opened 5 or 6 million the opening weekend, which that doesn't sound like much, but for 800 theaters, it was really solid.
Yeah.
But in those days, you didn't have to make it all in the opening weekend.
Right.
And we held our theaters for like 16 weeks.
Oh my God, 16 weeks. That's incredible.
Like that. Well, the next week we went up a little, and the third week we went up a little more.
Oh.
And then we dropped down, and so you're making 3 or 4 million a weekend and chugging in, you get up to 50 something million, which is 120 million today for $8 million. So, only then did I feel vindicated. But this is the truth that I've told this to another director, and he said the same thing happened to him. I said, I couldn't watch the movie for 10 years because every scene would call up this rage of what was going on behind the camera.
Oh, wow.
I honestly couldn't. I couldn't.
Oh my
God. And then I started letting go
through
of
therapy.
My anger. I can enjoy it now. I mean, I've been able to enjoy it for 20 years, but for the first 10 or 15 years, it was.
I always love to hear these stories of these movies that like would properly open and you'd get the facts or someone would call and say, we opened well enough or whatever it was. Like, do you remember the Friday night it opened? Like, do you have a distinct memory of it?
The reviews, Friday morning reviews were great across the country. So
great.
That was the first time anybody had said, nice going.
Yeah.
We like what you did. Oh, really? And we got a couple of national reviews had, that the magazines, difficult magazines like, Pauline Kael, the New Yorker.
Oh.
Well, she, was the biggest champion of Under Fire. So she was inclined to like me in Best of Times, which I wrote. So the rare occasions she liked something, the magazine would send it to the PR company.
Yeah.
So I knew that we had the New Yorker and Pauline Kael, which nobody else had, and I had her every time out. So that was a great indication. But we, it had been from the time we started shooting in September until June before we got a pat on the back. So
did you do that thing where you drive around and look at the lines and, you can't not, right? This is like a pretty critical moment.
Well, I went on this one. I've only done it a couple of times, 2 or 3 times maybe, because you can only do it in a movies where you want them to be laughing. That's how you judge.
Yeah.
And I remember going to Westwood and downtown and some Hollywood theaters. And, I just went up to the box office and said, hey, I made this movie. Can I stick my head in the back? And they said,
that's so great.
And you just judge where the laughter's coming and how.
Yeah.
And then I leave after 10 minutes.
So, Ron, this podcast was sort of created to create a lasting oral legacy of the truly great movies and the truly great filmmakers, and of which you are one. And I hope you're aware of that. I mean, I'm very saddened that you didn't hear that enough from your own group, but you really
I got over it.
You wrote this book. You decided to write it. You decided to sort of revisit it. What do you take away? What is the lasting legacy from your perspective from all that you've discovered, sort of revisiting this 30 years later?
Well, people have asked me, when did you know this movie was going to really last and grow? I said, it's only dawning on me now, honestly. It's sort of been accepted into this pantheon of some kind of American classics, which is thrilling. My big concern is I'm trying to get a new movie off the ground. That's maybe the book will help me do that. I also really appreciate the wide range of people who like the book, because I don't try to write movies or direct movies I don't want to preach to the choir. I like that my movies appeal across the board politically and culturally in this day of polarized divides. I've done this talk radio in Alabama and Tennessee of men who love this book.
Yeah.
As well as the literary podcasts and groups in New York.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to make movies for people who think like me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make movies in a certain way for people who don't and might and will.
Yeah.
And who
Yeah.
cares.
Yeah. You're a great unifier. This movie is a great unifier.
Yeah. And look, there's Kevin's. I mean, if one was to go back and break it down, Kevin was introduced George H.W. Bush at the Republican convention. Susan's politics are well known, and Tim's. There's people from all over the spectrum. And all we're trying to do is tell a story.
For me, the reason I love it so much, there's so much elegance and complexity in the movie, but it really does harken back. Maybe it's the idea of minor league baseball, but like it feels simpler in all of its complexity. And there's such warmth and love that inhabits the film. And so it really is one of my favorites. So Ron, thank you so much. I mean, this was like such a wonderful experience for me. I'm just like, I said I did to my group, I do this because I love listening to great stories, and you really are a great storyteller. And so thank you for like just taking the time with us. It's amazing.
I'm happy to be here and glad I could help the ball club.
I've tried them all, I really have. And the only church that truly feeds the soul day in, day out is the Church of Baseball.
So Bexy, what did you think of that episode?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Are we ever going to say anything other than that?
I don't think we can.
Let's keep that positive energy. But that was really so cool. I mean, what a gentleman. And he was a minor league baseball player, a proper athlete. But also, I mean, the things he talked about, he was like truly, as I said in our intro, a philosopher king. I mean, he studied like Greek literature, Shakespeare. I mean, I think there's all these sort of themes in the film that were so interesting. But at first glance, it's just a baseball movie.
Yeah. When he was talking about the inspiration being Lysistrata, who would ever have thought that the combination of Aristophanes and minor league baseball would create an incredible film?
I was just completely dazzled. I really was. It's so funny because I'm a huge Jane Austen fan also. And I don't think he like really appreciated this reference I made, but I think the thing with the Annie character and Crash, they both were filled with tremendous pride, and it was the thing that could have kept them apart. I think that's like a very big theme in Pride and Prejudice. That's like totally Elizabeth and Darcy. And so I really see there's like themes in his movie that are so literary and philosophical. And I was just like so into that.
And I think it was really interesting to think about in the larger context of feminism. The way women are presented in works of fiction throughout history, like Lysistrata, ancient Greece, these women are holding a sex strike. And then you go through much more conservative periods. But then you get to even Jane Austen, which was a much more conservative period in history. Even her female characters have this strength and this confidence about them, not necessarily sexually. Yeah. And then by the time we get to Bull Durham, Susan Sarandon's character is so sexually confident and empowered that it harkens back to
another era.
Yeah.
Well, also, I mean, how about life imitating art? The way that Sarandon secured the role just felt like a work of fiction. Literally flying from Italy to secure the part and knowing what she had to do that, I just thought that was the sort of most powerful moment of the entire tale for me. I mean, we have become big fans of Sarandon through these podcasts, having talked about her a bit in the Thelma and Louise, but what an incredible, iconic feminist figure she is. And just walking through the halls of Orion was just kind of so badass. And so Annie, it was sort of like she was inhabiting the character already.
it was genius.
Mm-hmm.
No one had to tell her what was going on.
Right.
She knew what was going on, and she knew exactly what to do. I was blown away by that story. I think it's incredible. And the fact that she just took that initiative and was so bold in that way.
Yeah.
And it worked. It paid off for her.
It really did.
And she was the perfect, I can't imagine anyone else playing that character. She did it so well.
She really did. You know, it was really fun talking to Ron because he had obviously just done so much research on his book, The Church of Baseball, which was literally the making of Bull Durham from beginning to end. And so the detail with which he was able to communicate the way everything got made. And by the way, it seemed to be so quick, the process of having the green light to shooting. I mean, he claims it was like less than 5 weeks in which he put everything together. I literally cannot even fathom that. But I mean, who am I? You know, I assume it's the truth. He just had gone back and done all this research. But what a pleasure to talk to him because he really had like such a keen knowledge of every detail of the shoot, you know?
And I appreciated, I knew I was going to like this movie early on because he said in the podcast that a lot of sports movies get it wrong in terms of what the athletes actually go through. They put on screen what they think the fans want to see. They don't accurately portray what athletes are feeling and what they're experiencing. And early on, there's a scene when Crash is up to bat for the first time. And he's doing this inner monologue of, okay, he's going to throw a fastball, do this on the outside. And
to get inside the brain.
You know
Totally.
he's going to get a hit.
Yeah.
Right? In my head,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, he's about to get a home run. That's what's going to happen here. And then he didn't.
Yes.
And I said, oh, this isn't a normal sports movie because normally he would get a hit
Right.
and then you're rooting for him.
And to get inside the mind of an athlete, that is also a hugely unique thing, right? He had been through it for years and years. And just the life of a minor leaguer, you know, you're never going to the majors. You know, in a way, you're sort of relegated to this life and passion that you love, but it doesn't love you back. I just thought that was like, gave me the chills when he said that. It's just so great.
Because it's so true.
Yeah.
There's always something in everyone's life that you love more than it loves you back.
Yeah.
Like you said, whether it's a job, a relationship.
Totally.
And it was genius. And that's how you know you're passionate about it. That's how you know you really love it.
I know. So Ron Shelton, the great philosopher king. I mean, I really could talk to that guy for hours. He should probably be giving us advice, you know, on a weekly basis. But we were lucky to get him. We were lucky to get him for that hour and a half. All right, Bex. Well, I love you. You're the greatest. To our listeners, you know, subscribe whenever you're listening from. We are having so much fun doing this, exploring these old movies, and please DM us with movies you'd like us to explore. Follow us at Stay Gold Features on Instagram, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon.